right, let's go ahead and begin. Welcome to our event today. I'm Susie Keefe. I am the director of the Center for Justice and Law at Hamline University. I am professor of public health and sociology. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to be welcoming you all here for real talk about abolition and the money bail system. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. We are still on stolen land, and I want to share the recently agreed upon land acknowledgement of all 11 tribes in Minnesota through MIAC. I am standing on traditional and ancestral Dakota land, and I want to take this opportunity and every opportunity moving forward to acknowledge the colonial and genocidal histories that are woven into the land. The founding of institutions such as Hamline came at a dire cost to the Dakota people. The Dakota were forced to cede their lands in return for goods and services, but the government did not uphold the terms of these treaties, leading to widespread devastation. We recognize this painful past, and we honor Dakota people's history on this land, their sovereignty, and their continued contributions to our region. Minnesota comes from the Dakota name for this region, Minnesota Makoke, the land where the waters reflect the skies. The Dakota and numerous other indigenous peoples whose cultural, spiritual, and economic practices are intrinsically woven to this land and hold this land sacred. We recognize them as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it, who had thriving and vibrant communities prior to disruption by settlers. Today, the state of Minnesota shares geography with 11 tribal nations. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm tribal sovereignty and hold Hamline and the Center for Justice and Law accountable to recognize and counter the historical and contemporary injustices that continue to impact Indigenous people through mutually beneficial partnerships, research, policies, and practices that respect indigeneity. The mission of the Center for Justice and Law is to develop creative, concrete, and equitable solutions to legal issues and policy concerns through teaching, research, and active collaboration with community partners and policymakers. This year, with the emergence of COVID-19 and an international movement for racial justice, we recognize this moment calls for a radical reckoning of the depths of the inequality in this country and across the world. In service to this, we aim to center all of our events around the following 3 commitments: employing an anti-racist lens, including our choice of speakers, content, branding, and facilitation; centering community members as experts in identifying and designing solutions to policy and legal challenges; and finally, to be inspired to act on the problems of our society. A little context. Our theme this year is health, justice, and the law, efforts to improve health among those most impacted by health inequities and disparities are impeded by inequitable social structures, racism, legal systems, and regulatory schemes that are ill-fitted to take into account the social determinants of health in decision-making models and legal interpretation. The social and legal roots of poor health and how health inequity, social injustice, and poverty are inextricably linked are the foundation of our 2020-2021 programming. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the incredible team of women who are working with me this year for their courage, their commitment, and their vision. And I especially want to shout out to Medadel Lee for bringing this topic to our attention in one of our first meetings this year as we planned our programming. Today, we all come together in community to discuss abolition and the money bail system as a public health issue. I want to center us as we begin in this nation built on white supremacy, the murders of a seemingly unending list of Black and Indigenous people of color who are falsely arrested or attacked, brutalized, and killed with impunity. Their deaths have occurred in a context in which Black people are also far likelier to die from COVID-19 than their white counterparts. The current recession has hit Black communities particularly hard, as they and their families are already navigating employment discrimination and wealth inequality, which are themselves just 2 products of racialized violence rooted in centuries-old legacies of slavery, discrimination, and exploitation. A few comments about our structure today. The format: we will begin with our first panel, which includes government and legal perspectives, which will include Q&A. We will take questions at any time in the Facebook Live chat and in the Zoom chat, and our team will curate those questions and get them to the panelists and the moderator. So anytime you have a question, you can go ahead and direct it there. Our keynote speaker will join us at 12:30 and will speak and have some time for Q&A, and then we'll hold space for our second panel before second panel takes over. So that second panel includes community leaders and activists, and there will also be time for Q&A at the end of that panel discussion. Two more things before I turn it over. We have shared our panelist bios and photos with all of you in attendance ahead of time. And the panelists have all agreed to introduce themselves more informally today as they speak, rather than holding space for extended introductions, as time is precious. That being said, we don't have any scheduled breaks today. We are going to plow on through this time together because there's so much. I think we could spend days having this conversation, and we invite you to grab your lunch or take a break as is needed. We are recording this discussion, so if you need to come back to something, it will be available to you. With that, thank you so much for your attention, and I'm going to hand it over to Prince Corbett, who is the moderator of our first panel. Thank you, Prince.
Thank you so much, Susie, for the introduction. We want to thank everyone who's joining us on Zoom. We want to thank everyone who's joining us on Facebook Live. Please, please, please make this a very interactive conversation. We don't want this just to be us speaking at you, but we want to engage and be able to answer questions. So if you all have any questions, if you're in Zoom land, please put those in the chat. For those of you who are joining us on Facebook Live, please put your questions or comments in the Facebook live stream. Please include any comments as well, and utilize the chat feature as a way to engage one another. So my name is Prince Corbett. I will be your moderator for this panel. My normal work duties is Racial and Health Equity Administrator at Ramsey County, where I co-lead our Racial Equity and Community Engagement Response Team, where we're doing our best to address the racial inequities of COVID in Ramsey County. And I also am a formerly incarcerated justice-impacted individual, and glad to moderate this panelist and conversation of wonderful people. So without further ado, we're going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. And I'd like to open up this panel by asking each of you to introduce yourselves and share with us how, in your current role, you work to address the challenges of money bail, to move it forward, to create change. So introduce yourselves, your current role, and then what it is that you do to really address the issues of money bail. And I'm gonna pull on David first, because I see him first.
So my name is David Starks. I have have been affected by incarceration. Matter of fact, I was just released from the BOP on less than a month ago on November 13th. I'm currently in a role at face-to-face in partnership with the Ramsey County Juvenile Justice Division, in which we will use restorative justice practices for juveniles versus the regular criminal justice system. I've always worked, I've always mentored young men who face challenges. I've faced challenges as a juvenile with the justice system. As an adult, I've been fortunate because I've been in a situation where I could afford good advocacy and always bailed out, but I also see the problem with the bail system in a myriad of ways. And I've seen people who, I've been in the holding tank with people who shouldn't have been arrested, but they were about to go out there and plead guilty because they didn't have advocacy or bail money, and not pleading guilty would mean not getting out that day and losing your job because you can't get to work for something you shouldn't have been in jail for in the first place. So it's not about me, it's about everybody else.
Thank you so much, David. And Jared.
Thanks for having me here. I appreciate it. So my name is Jared Mollenkof. I'm an assistant public defender in Hennepin County. I also serve on the board of the Minnesota Freedom Fund. So I work on bail issues. So this is my 8th year as a public defender. So I worked in Nashville prior to Hennepin County, and I worked with the Nashville Community Bail Fund and I've done a lot of litigation over the years around bail, pushing towards the ending of a practice that requires people to buy their freedom. And we are amongst the furthest outlier countries anyway, on the planet when it comes to bail. And it's a system that needs to be fundamentally changed.
Thank you, Jared. And next I see Natasha.
Hi, thank you, Prince. Hi, everyone. My name is Natasha Phelps. I'm a lead senior staff attorney at the Public Health Law Center. We are a nonprofit law center actually located in Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law. And we're a separate nonprofit entity, and we focus on public health policy at a tribal as well as a federal, state, and local level. We work with governments on all of those levels. We work with nonprofits, we work with community-based organizations, and we do provide what we call legal technical assistance to all of them, and also private individuals. And so we help on all levels, and our goal is to achieve and to assist with equitable public health policy. I specialize specifically in commercial tobacco policy, but one of my other big specialties is to talk about equitable public health policy in general. I also serve on the board of directors for the Center for Black Health and Equity. And so I think that I'm here today because health is something that everyone is talking about right now, especially with COVID-19 and the unacceptable disparities that we see associated with the pandemic, not just because of who is dying from the pandemic, but also because of who is unemployed and who is exposed, including those who are incarcerated, which are some of the earliest and still current spots for COVID outbreaks. Some of those outbreaks really killing people who were not even convicted of a crime. And so it's definitely, people are understanding that the definition of health is more expansive than a lot of people were thinking. It's holistic. Health is employment. Health is freedom. Health is all of these things. And so my work really interacts with the issue of money bail in the criminal court system, in the before and in the after, as far as what we can do to affect it. And so in the before, it's really important as a public health professional to understand that there are social, economic, and environmental factors that lead to the likelihood of entering into the criminal court system, and then also understanding that social, economic, and environmental factors like incarceration and involvement in the criminal court system also results in poorer health outcomes and a differentiation in life expectancy. And so these are really avoidable and unjust outcomes with the likelihood of entering and then the effect of coming out of a system like the criminal court system. And so you really can't talk about it without talking about public health. And so because public health regulations are meant to advance public health, we are really starting to understand, I think, generally in the public health community, that the implications of public health regulations like penalties cannot further advance health inequity and other inequities like adding to mass incarceration, for example. So for far too long, public health regulation has not intentionally advanced equity in general, but it is now, and COVID-19 is really highlighting that. So I'm glad to be invited today to bring that perspective into all of this really important information that you all will share.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Nice way to bring the public health piece into this conversation. And last but not least, County Attorney John Choi.
Thank you, Prince. Thank you for moderating this panel. Thank you to Hamlin, the Center for Justice and Law, for inviting me to be a part of this really neat panel discussion. For those of you who don't know, I have this great honor and privilege of being able to serve as the Ramsey County Attorney. I've been in that role since January of 2011. And I come to this work by first acknowledging that I have been somebody who perpetuated many of the harms that the cash bail system causes to our community. I was also the city attorney before I became the elected county attorney, and in that role, and in the beginning part of my tenure as county attorney, I never really ever questioned the cash bail system, but I have taken upon myself to learn more about it, and I am today at a place where it is my goal to end the cash bail system, because I can see how there are inequities, how it exacerbates racial discrimination in our criminal justice system. And it buttresses mass incarceration, which is another aspect of all of this, because incarceration is not just about prison sentences, but it's also about pretrial detention. And I feel so whole today. I mean, I'm a much different human being, a much different chief prosecutor than I was when I first started in this role today. And a lot of that has to do with developing proximity and relationship with the community that I serve, especially the community that has been most negatively impacted by the criminal justice system, and also connecting the history of this country to what happens today in policing and in criminal justice. I've intentionally taken that journey. I've had the opportunity to travel to Montgomery, Alabama twice in the past maybe 3 or 4 years. And it's really changed me as a leader, as a human being, about the things that we need to do to change in this country. And so as I have moved forward, I'm also recognizing that, you know, it's very simple for me as the person that has immense power in the system to go into a room and surround myself with very smart people and come up with solutions. But I've come to realize from an equity standpoint, an important piece of this in terms of a path forward in how we actually create equity in our systems is to recognize that I have to share my power, to bring people to the table that have never been invited, and co-design new ways of thinking about how we do our work, how we reimagine a justice system. The people that are currently in our justice system today, we didn't design these systems. In fact, many of these systems have been with us since the beginning of the origins of this country. And we have, I think, failed to properly question the outcomes and the impacts to everybody in our society. And today I feel so whole because I feel this conversation about digging deep and thinking about starting all over is possible. And so for me, I'm just really, really excited about that. But a big part of this, and I know we're going to get into talking a little bit about the work that's been happening in Ramsey County, but the premise and the value and the most important thing is that we're sharing power. We're working to co-design these changes, as opposed to the old model where the powerful prosecutor decides everything. Quite frankly, if you think about it, many of the aspects of the executive branch of government that enforces the law, whether it's policing and prosecution, we have had the luxury, I think, to be able to do these things without people paying attention. But today, I think more and more people are paying attention, and they're not liking what they're seeing. And I think that's really great because, quite frankly, I think, and if we want better policing, if we want better prosecution, if we want a better criminal justice system, the people of this country, the people of the state of Minnesota and our communities need to come forward and recognize that they own these systems. And of course, we who have this power need to share that with those communities, and especially those that have been the most impacted.
Thank you so much, County Attorney Choi, Natasha, Jared, and David, for those wonderful introductions. And for everyone who's just joining us on Zoom and on Facebook Live, once again, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat on Facebook Live. If you have any questions for the panelists, please make sure that you put those in the comments and we will do our best to get to you. Now, for these next series of questions, I'm just going to open it up for anyone on the panel to be able to answer. So for this wonderful session on abolishing the money bail system, we invited Marian Kaba as one of the keynotes because after the uprisings, the growing pandemic, and the declaration on racism as a public health crisis, abolition has become front and center at this work. And I wanted to read a quote from an article that Miriam has stated. She stated that the starting point, and this is the gift that abolition as an ideology and a practice has given me, is the idea that the system isn't actually broken, right? Because then I'm not preoccupied with trying to fix it. That's not my goal. All I want to do is abolish and end it. Therefore, the imperatives of what I'm trying to do, the training, the questions, the analysis, all have been geared towards that. And then this doesn't force me to run around in circles, plugging my fingers in the dike elsewhere as the water is threatening to overwhelm all of us. So with that quote, I want to open it up to the panel. It's about, for you, what role does abolition take in your work?
So I can just kind of start with that. I think, Prince, that quote and the way that you frame this question is so important for us, all of us, to consider, because I believe that the criminal justice system is not broken. It's actually designed to do exactly what it's doing today. It's based upon an assembly line mentality of processing. It's and not understanding and questioning what actually comes onto that criminal justice assembly line. We're just not thinking about any of those things, and we have just accepted this is what is supposed to happen. So if we're in the mode of believing that we should tinker with the system to try to improve it, so in other words, if we're going to create a diversion program, or we're going to think about ways to improve the front door of the justice system, what we're doing is actually we're just perpetuating this underlying system. And today, I think it's possible for us to start imagining something that's different. And so when we talk about abolition in the context of ending cash bail, it starts with that. But also, I want to make it clear, though, that when we say that we want to end cash bail, I think saying out loud the things that we want or believe are important, but it does have to be replaced by something. And the question is, what is that? And as I have been developing proximity to community and listening to the voices of people who have been most impacted, I think a big part of that is to have community involved with the responses that we have to certain incidences, that community is more involved in recognizing that they have this obligation to be involved in controlling policing and controlling what happens in the justice system. Because if we don't have that, we will basically go back to the way that it was, which is that the system gets to decide about what we do. So it is important to say out loud what we want, but we also, I think, have to be thinking about then what it is that are we going to do to replace it. It doesn't have to. It actually, when you embark on an effort, a journey to transform a system or to reimagine it or to think from scratch, it's really hard to do, because I think it's so ingrained in our systems to think about designing something and then we end up thinking about doing something very similar to what we already have. And so today, I think there's license for all of us. And there's also the imperative that we need to be engaged to start thinking about how to think about doing something differently. Again, none of us on this call or on this panel design the current system, but we can do something, I think, hopefully different.
So if I can hop in, yeah, when we talk about abolition, I think that the framework that is necessary from my perspective to start with is that this conversation is a lot older than some of the folks coming to the conversation right now recognize. I think the movement to defund the police after the murder of George Floyd has brought to the attention of a lot of people the abolitionist framework, but it's an old conversation. It's a conversation that has been led in a lot of ways by Black women. We need to recognize that Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Angela Davis, Miriam Kaba have been having this conversation, and that we are joining them. They have done the work, they have done the research. This is a conversation that has been going on. And, you know, when we talk about abolition, a lot of the framing, you know, coming out of the 70s and out of a long conversation started primarily by Black abolitionists. We're talking about moratorium, decarceration, and excarceration. So that means stop building cages, let the people out of the cages that are already in cages, and the money that you were gonna use to build cages, use to figure out how to keep people from the problems that led to them going into cages. So when we talk about moratorium, decarceration, excarceration, we're talking about an enormous shifting in resources and an imagining of the world that allows for that enormous shift of resources. And so when we look at the movement that we've seen over, you know, this summer and fall, and we look at people talking about defunding the police, I think that there are people that want to limit the scope of that call and limit the scope of what abolitionists are demanding. And I think that we should push back against the folks that want to talk about incrementalism and want to move these things slowly. And we should say, we know that there are far too many people in cages. We know that that is requiring, you know, by some estimates, $1 trillion in resources a year to keep those people caged, and, you know, and all of the loss to their communities as a result of them being in cages. And so we start with stop putting people in cages, let the people out of cages that are already in there. And then when we look at all of the money that saves, how do you use those resources to keep people from causing the harm that society thinks means they need to be caged?
I guess I can go after that because in public health, a lot of the time what activity or behavior we're regulating or attempting to address the regulation stems from, you know, these social determinants that I was talking about before. So sometimes they're because of substance misuse and addiction. And, you know, so what Jared was talking about with the, you know, addressing the why, you know, the why people are doing what they're doing. When you look at that and you try to consider an effective solution, because that's what really all laws and policies should do, but especially public health laws and policy is based so much in science and so much what basically public health policy, like regulating addiction or some other type of behavior. We really need to consider whether or not, you know, incarceration is actually the solution to somebody who is experiencing addiction. And the science does not fall in favor of incarcerating people who are suffering from an addiction. And so as people who are working in public health, but also working in the criminal sphere, you know, there's a lot of movement towards decriminalization of substance misuse, of commercial tobacco use. And so you see states like Oregon, who just recently decriminalized the use of multiple drug use. And so that's a trend that we're seeing in public health. And I think it begs the question, especially because of COVID-19 and the COVID-19 public health regulations that are out there, when we're seeing extreme disparities related to COVID-19 and also seeing that the effect of some of the COVID-19 regulations only contributes to the cycle. And so people come maybe cited with a high fine because it doesn't just stop at criminalizations. You know, we also talk about high fines in public health regulation and the collateral damage that can come from that. You know, is it effective to fine or incarcerate people when there's a pandemic going on and people are behaving in a world in which a pandemic is occurring? And so these are really important questions, and something that I think is really a good example in public health that can be used in other areas of law as well, is that yes, the solution, we need teeth to regulation in order for it to work, but that includes enforcement, but it does not have to mean what we've always thought it has meant, what a lot of people have thought it has meant for a while. A lot of enforcement comes in the community buy-in stage before a policy is passed, to have the community behind it. And so it's a self-enforcing regulation because the community sees the benefit in it, and we're a part of the process in designing it and seeing it through. And so I think, especially with something like a pandemic and the types of regulations that we're seeing right now, having people, ensuring that there's enough community education so people understand why they're supposed to do or not do X, Y, Z, versus, people violating either a lack of understanding or a lack of inability, or for whatever reason, and then either citing them or incarcerating them, and then seeing them, their likelihood of being infected by COVID or experiencing any other inequity that will lead to further health inequity, really doesn't address the problem. And so in public health, it's all about matching your intention for passing a public health policy, which most of the time is always to advance public health, with the actual regulation itself. And so if you have criminalization in your public health regulation, I have yet to see an example where it's not out of alignment with their intention, which is to advance public health, because criminalization does not advance public health.
Thanks,
and so that just leads to this discussion of, I'm sorry, but just to say, whether or not criminalization needs to be a part of public health regulation at all, I think is really worthy of a conversation, which would lead to us talking about, whether or not incarceration is ethical. So that's how public health comes into the conversation.
Yes, most definitely. And I would say we're seeing that definitely in Minnesota. And I know a lot of people attending are from like all over the country. But our Minnesota Department of Corrections, when it comes to COVID in our prison systems, roughly about 1 in 3 currently incarcerated individuals in Minnesota have been tested positive for COVID. And that is a huge crisis, coupled with the stress that comes with it, and then the family stress as well. And one of the questions or comments that came in the chat was, arrest and detention are already stressful for detainees, for those who are being detained. This person was curious if there's any medical studies researching the potentiality of illegal and unethical health practices or effects stemming from post-traumatic stress, such as depression, suicide, or prospect of future recidivism. I want to open that up for the panelists as well. So recognizing that the stress from being detained, we're in a pandemic, people who do get detained, who are arrested, have that additional stress and worries from being presented with COVID, but any medical studies or any information that anyone can share?
I couldn't speak to any medical studies, but I do think it's helpful for folks to know that one aspect of the pandemic right now means that a lot of folks are being held in solitary confinement. So the vast majority of my clients right now are spending 23 hours out of their day in a solitary cell in the hopes of slowing the transmission of the virus. And I think that it is hard to predict what the mental health outcomes I think we can predict what the outcomes will be, that they will be good, but how hard hit people will be by that additional level of isolation and solitary confinement, I think is going to be devastating to people who have to spend months in cells for 23 hours by themselves a day.
And I can just say, I think there are a lot of studies, like I said, for that person, if they wanted to contact me, I would be happy to help them collect resources on this topic, but I just wanted to say some interesting things to look at that are discussing the issue that you raised, are to look into the social determinants of health and post-traumatic stress disorder with incarceration. There are studies on that. The other thing I really wanted to raise, because Prince, you made a good point about the families. So it's not just the individual who is entering into or involved in the criminal court system, but the families and the collateral impact of that. And when it comes to health, one of the things that I think is really a really important conversation right now is to talk about adverse childhood experiences, and having a parent or a loved one involved in the criminal court system, seeing or witnessing any type of police brutality. These are all really adverse childhood experiences that impact health outcome and life expectancy. And so I just wanted to note, for whoever asked that question, that would be a really important part to look into, is the adverse childhood experience of incarceration.
So may I poke in for a minute? So when we talk about adverse childhood experiences, of course, there's 10 categories, right? One is an incarcerated family member. One is divorced parents or separated parents or fractured family foundation. One is abuse of neglect, or physical neglect, right? And emotional neglect. Those are 4 of the 10. And so we know that a person with an average childhood experience score of just 4 increases the child's likelihood to be have behavioral learning disabilities and behavioral problems at school. So an incarcerated parent already puts our child at extreme risk. So a lot of times we talk about collateral consequences, and I think that's the wrong term. I think it's residual consequences. I think it is paying a system out in rural areas, paying people out in rural areas off the lives of our children and ourselves. Same with post-traumatic stress disorder, right? There's nothing post about our condition, right? This is a persistent, ongoing thing. So we can't treat a person for an environment around us. And I think there's a brother out in Oakland, California, does a lot of work, Dr. Sean Jenwright, and he talks about that, right? The correct term is really persistent traumatic stress environment. And because of collateral consequences, when it comes to re-entering society, we get put in persistent traumatic stress environments. Our people live in persistent traumatic stress environments. So when you talk about the public health, like, we're really trying to address a person for a condition in society. And we need to use the right terms so we don't treat a little piece of a huge puzzle. We also talked about how it affects people in prison. When I was in, this is on a federal level, but when I was in the BOP, the entire BOP went on a schedule from April 1st to April 14th. So during those 14 days, administrators were supposed to identify people who were close proximity to the door, people who were elderly, and people who had underlying conditions that would put them at the greatest risk of succumbing to COVID-19. I left prison. I got finished with the BOP a couple of weeks ago, but I left prison on May 18th. That was my date for home confinement. On April 1st, there was 472 inmates at FPC Duluth. When I left on May 18th, and I shouldn't have left on May 18th, I was within close proximity to the door, but when I left on May 18th, there had not been a single person, not a Black person, that left on COVID, on the CARES Act. But the population, when I left, went from 401 to 400. There might have been 6 or 7 of us that left because we were supposed to, but on that day, all the rest of those people were white people, and Mexicans now are in prison. If you go to the BOP website, you won't see any Mexican people, Hispanic people in their population because they're counted as white. Staff and administration is different. But when you look at their website, you will see nothing but Black, white, Asian, and indigenous natives. So it's sad. And I still get messages every day from children of people who their fathers are in there, and they're concerned about the numbers. Right now, the numbers are really going up in FPC Duluth, really in all the federal prisons, but it's us that are getting ignored. The criteria to get out was you had to have 65 to 75% of your time complete. And like I said, be within close proximity to the door, that would automatically have that much time complete, or else have underlying health conditions, be up in age. There was young 36-year-old white dudes, hadn't served any time, had nothing wrong with them. And they were using that window to get them up out of prison and keeping us in some pretty crazy conditions. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Thank you for that. And I know like this theme is around like the money cash bail system and understanding that for individuals who are incarcerated, a lot of people currently who are detainees and incarcerated may not have that ability to afford the bail. And that also has an impact on family. And even for those who are able to afford bail, a $40,000 bail and a family member has to put up a certain amount to put things up for collateral. And want to ask for County Attorney Choi, because there's this theme that's coming out around family members and loved ones connected to those who are incarcerated and impacted by the money bail system. How does family members, how does community inform the work that you're doing in Ramsey County to really reform the money bail system?
Yeah, thanks, Prince, for asking that question. And let me also lift up something that you said as well about recognizing that the harm of the cash bail industry. I don't think that the public knows enough about how the industry itself, it's a for-profit industry, and how it operates. It's predatory in nature, and they'll make families, sign everything away. And I think there's this notion in the criminal justice system that, well, if we can make somebody put money into this or, sign away or whatever it is, that will make sure that this person gets to court. And I think that in not understanding what that does to a family or to the people that might love this particular person, I think that we're not seeing the humanness of all of this. And in many ways, I think by ignoring the racial impact, it's actually a racial discriminatory practice to ignore that predatory impact of the cash bail system. And I am a supporter of the work that the Freedom Fund is doing, because what they're doing is from a nonprofit perspective. It's not a solution to ending cash bail, but at least it provides a mechanism by which we're taking it out from the predatory cash bail system. So I think that's just really important for us to understand. One of the reasons why we need to eliminate the current cash bail system and replace it with something, this notion, I think we need to also get back to this notion of community recognizance, which is to say that, like, I don't think that notion actually exists today, but this notion that communities without the notion of money can ensure that people are doing what they need to do, and also have a way to be participating as a part of the case that might be against them. But that work with community, all of what I just said comes to me because it's working with the community, listening to perspectives, learning about the racial inequities that exist. And then again, it's about kind of co-designing a new way forward. It's not about me coming up with the greatest idea, but it's about actually sitting at a table, learning, and then also investing in these communities and these organizations. As an example, before the Freedom Fund had like $30-some million, we in Ramsey County figured out a way to actually have the Freedom Fund come into our community, because we knew that that would provide a way for a way to address the inequities of the cash bail system and provide some relief to those families. And then I think the bigger part of the work that's been happening around cash bail in Ramsey County is the work that we're doing as a part of our bail reform committee. It's a committee that's comprised, and it's led by lots of community voices, Eli Darris from the ACLU and other community members are right at that table, and we're designing something. We realize that we don't have the power to change the current cash bail system because it's baked into our Constitution at the state level and in our laws and in our court rules. And so that's another conversation about how do we change that and create something that would be better for all of us. But locally, we actually do have the power. So I have the power as the chief prosecutor, the sheriff as the jailer, has certain powers that they have. And so through lots of conversations and learning about different perspectives, we are now co-designing a way that we could do something different, which is really to say that, well, why? So if we have these powers to release people before they're even in court for the first time, could we use the power of the sheriff? Could we use the power of the county attorney to release individuals before that first appearance? So it's like a deflection. Could we deflect people at the booking desk and say, you're not coming in here, you're gonna go with a community member, a resource community organization, and they'll help you. And we'll have you'll have an appointment or a first appearance later, and we'll deal with that later. So that's the kind of the thing that we're designing. And then through that, we realized, well, we need resources, we need assistance, right? And so then together with our community, we applied for a grant. It's not money coming to Ramsey County, but it's a technical assistance grant to help us think about all of this and to design that. And so we got recognition or acceptance from the Arnold Foundation to come into Ramsey County and help us as we move forward in this journey. And we're still at it, but we've been having this conversation for almost 2 years now. But we meet every 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, we're, talking with one another. We're having important conversations. We're designing something that would be what we can do at the local level. But that's what we, I think, have to do for those of us who are in systems, is to invite our community, especially the community that has the perspective of advocating for the most impacted people, and allow those voices to be a part of the creation of how we move forward. And when we do that, I think we're going to certainly address the equity issues. We're going to, I think, have more trust and legitimacy in our solutions. And I think it's a way that it's a path forward for our society.
Thank you so much, County Attorney Choi. So learning about one of the initiatives that Ramsey County is doing to address the money bail system. Jared, there's this theme around not just individuals directly impacted, but families. And I recall when I was in Hennepin County filing my case, and I know you're a Hennepin County public defender, I had a very high bail, and I'm pretty sure like my mom and loved ones was calling my public defender, like, how do we get the bail reduced? Any insight that you could share, like anything that sticks out about like the family members and loved ones who are also impacted? Because I'm on Facebook watching Bounty Hunter D repoing people's cars because somebody didn't pay the bail bondsman or somebody didn't show up to court. But any insight from family members or loved ones or those impacted like that you have like over the years that really stick out?
Thanks. Yeah. I sort of have the unique perspective that comes from being a public defender and also working for the Minnesota Freedom Fund. So I do have those sort of fortunate cases where the fund is able to bail out my clients, right? So serving on their board and being a public defender is sort of married in that way, where a number of my clients are out because of the fund. And the way that impacts families, I think, I guess I'll talk about sort of two specific aspects of that. We've seen for a very long time that there has been an enormous extraction of wealth out of Black communities through the bail system. And so we've seen how Black women have been funneling money into where it ultimately ends up with very large insurance companies through the bail system. And it has an enormous detrimental effect on generational wealth because of that money that is extracted. And so not only the financial labor that is demanded of people, but the emotional labor and the way that it affects people when they desperately want to get their loved ones out and they're being asked to do something that they don't have the ability to do, to turn over money they don't have in order to get a loved one out of custody. That emotional labor is in a lot of ways as cruel as the demand, when people have to turn over money that is the last of the money they have. And so we see all sorts of harm done to families that are asked to make the decision to forego other things in order to pay the ransom for their loved one to get them out of custody. I think something that's problematic that we're seeing as a result of COVID right now is that for the sort of long-term implications for families is that, so much is being changed over to remote systems, right? So visits right now, while there was already a trend for a lot of visitation to happen by video conferencing, now we have almost exclusively, if people want to come down to the jail and do in-person visits, that's not happening in person any longer, right? And so they're setting up video conferencing and phone calls. And I think that a pernicious sort of an impact that we may see coming out of COVID is this desire to further strip out the human interactions from the system and to allow things to happen through screens and without physical touch. And I think that every step where we break down relationships, right? Like that is what fundamentally the bail system does. And John sort of hinted at this when he talked about how we've moved away from community recognizance, right? Like when we say we take away relationships and we exchange them with transactions, right? We stop saying that families can be relied upon to bring people back to court. Instead, we need that intermediary of money, right? We exchange the relationship for the transaction. And every time that we do that, we strip some of the humanity out of the system. And so I think that when we look at the way that families are stripped out and their love for someone is exchanged with money in order to ensure that they'll come back to court, that hurts the family and it hurts society.
Thank you so much, Jared, for that insight. And for Natasha, Natasha, can you talk a little bit more about your work and then the relationship between the criminalization of poverty, of public health, and then the money bail system? How does this fit into the health equity approach of the Public Health Law Center?
Yeah, thanks, Prince. So the health equity approach that we take, and that I think a lot more public health professionals and organizations and government entities are taking, is this, I think it's been helpful to see it in the educational system, talking about this whole child approach. It's having a holistic public health understanding. And so, there are many different things that we work on at the Public Health Law Center in specific public health policy arenas. Like I said, commercial tobacco is what I specialize in, but also healthy eating and access to food and food justice, and also active living and physical spaces, things like that. But also we're working in general on policies like racism as a public health emergency, racism as a public health crisis. There are many ways in which communities are terming it across the country. We're tracking all of those action items. We're deciphering them based on demographics of the jurisdictions, and what those policies actually do. I mean, the reason why I wanted to just focus on the racism as a public health crisis piece of my work is just because I feel like it is related to the issue of, bail and incarceration. And I think it highlights a really great opportunity that we have right now through a mechanism that is public health. So in response to COVID-19 and the intense disparities that we see from that, as well as the murder of George Floyd and the uprising, there has been a lot of talk about racism as a public health emergency, that racism itself, as a systemic issue, and in many different ways it actually impacts public health, and COVID-19 just highlighted that. But the thing is, these racism as a public health crisis or emergency action items that we're seeing across the country don't just address things like police brutality or a pandemic of infectious disease. They also can touch on many, many other things, including cash bail, including incarceration, including decriminalization, all of these things. And so they look different all across the country, but we do see a lot of organizations and coalitions coming together to work on these action items. I would just say that a lot of them don't have teeth to them. So they don't, it's a lot of them are passed through like a declaration or a resolution, some through executive order. But still, where are the teeth? What are the responsibilities on the government to take action on the things that they're declaring? And so we are developing a model racism as a public health emergency crisis that touches on everything from Black maternal health to disparities in educational issues to incarceration. And so the biggest thing out of these declarations or resolutions is that you not only figure out what's going on and bring in the communities most impacted by the issue types, but then you also have teeth. So yes, you're declaring it, and either you're declaring that you're going to look into it, or you're declaring that you're going to take immediate action. And if you're declaring that you're going to look into it, then you definitely need to have an immediate action following a specific time frame that you set in that action item. The problem that we're seeing with many of these racism as a public health emergency crisis or emergency action items being passed around the country is that they don't have that teeth. They don't say this. You can't hear me? Okay. So there's nothing to say that the city needs to take action on things like cash bail, if the declaration seeks to look into that, or even just declare that there are disparities in cash bail settings, within the county or within the state, or whoever is passing the action item. It's just a declaration that it's a problem, and what is the point of that? And so there are many different ways in which you can have creative solutions. And I think in public health, this is where I think this idea of the criminal court system and cash bail specifically is at play right now with public health. And so it's this idea of us bringing in many different aspects of health and this holistic view of health and advancing health. That's why we at the Public Health Law Center are really working on issues like decriminalization, because we know that public health regulations that include criminalization or even high penalties is detrimental to public health. And so in these racism as a public health emergency action items and policies, we want to ensure that is being addressed, that you're doing a review of statutes, you're doing a review of local or municipal codes to identify places where criminalization is attached and can advance health inequity. And that's how you really tie it into these racism as a public health emergency action items. And I really do hope those of you who are on the call who are working on ending cash bail and whatever it is that you're focused on, I think that even abolition work too, you can bring that into these racism as a public health emergency crisis action items, and really ensure that the governments that are responsible have to take action on those, because they are declaring that racism is a public health emergency, and we know how the criminal court system contributes to that. So I definitely think that that's a big part of my job, Prince, that we're working on right now, and something I really hope to see continue. We're going to be doing a lot of anti-racism, anti-Blackness work, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Thanks, Natasha. And we noticed that too, like when everyone was declaring racism as a public health crisis, and like what actually goes behind it. Is it just words on paper, or what actually can be done? And want to open this question up to the panel around like, what agencies should community members, residents, or people put pressure on in order to eliminate the cash bail systems and to advance the abolition movement? So what agencies, like if I want to get together some community members and we really want to work towards eliminating the cash bail, what agencies, entities should community put pressure on?
Everyone call John's office. Just kidding, sorry.
So here's what I think. I think that the most important place where conversations need to occur and action needs to be taken is at the legislature. We need to figure out whether or not the Constitution has to be amended, and you can't amend that without the legislature enacting something to change whatever words, because right now there's language in the Constitution that allows for a right to have cash bail. And then the statutes that govern what the framework would be. I don't think that just eliminating cash bail and say that we're not going to do anything to replace it isn't tenable. It's not gonna, it won't happen. So I think advocates and community need to have conversations with the legislature about what that might look like. In Ramsey County, a part of our work around eliminating cash bail is just that, which is to convene community voices to come up with a proposal that we could at least speak with our Ramsey County legislators about kind of what community would like to see in terms of replacement for the cash bail system. Maybe it could be to recognize the notions of community recognizance and what that kind of what that might mean, so that ultimately people can get to court. So that's one piece, and I think that in terms of big substantive reform, it can't happen without that. So if you're wondering like what states have enacted that, New Jersey was probably the first one. That's the state that's been the most studied. And I think that's a state that has the most, I think, universal, more positive response to what has happened. And that's been around for a while. New York recently enacted bail reform. And it's I think it depends on who you talk to, but it hasn't been the smoothest thing. And I know that they're tinkering with trying to make it better. And then in California, I believe efforts have been enacted there. I'm not sure of other states, but I'm sure that there are. So Minnesota should join in this conversation. So that's number one. And then secondly, I think that we should have conversations at the local level about what can we do locally to deal with, I guess, if the legislature is not going to change anything, what can you do at the local level? So I would encourage all of you to ask I think the most important person in terms of access from an elective standpoint is probably the prosecutor, the county attorney. And so ask your county attorney, what are they doing to address the inequities of the cash bail system? And there are local solutions. And I think like Ramsey County is a perfect example. Now, the approach that we're taking is that we're doing this code designing with our community. And so like I had talked about, this deflection model is our attempt to basically say that we're not even going to have people in custody in the first place. So therefore, their first appearance in court would be like a week or 2 or 3 weeks down the road. And if they show up to that court appearance, there's absolutely no reason to have cash bail ordered on anybody. They could just be, because since they showed up, we trust that they're going to show up for the next appearance, right? So that's kind of right now our local solution to all of that. There was an announcement just recently with the Hennepin County prosecutor and the Washington County prosecutor talking about that they're not going to ask for bail. Now, in my opinion, I think, first of all, I think symbolically that action is really important, and it really calls out, I think, if Hennepin County has jurisdiction only over the felonies, and if the chief prosecutor is saying on these low-level felonies, which I think, by the way, cash bail isn't being ordered on these particular instances, but if they're saying that, then what does that say for city attorneys? So as an example, the practice that I understand that might be happening in Minneapolis about, $78 cash bail. I don't fully understand that, but I don't think that's a good thing that they would be imposing that type of bail on somebody so that they could pay the fine, I think it might be. So I think that is a kind of a solution, but at the end of the day, I don't necessarily think that it's that much will change, but symbolically, I think it's really, really important. But there are local things that people can do to address the current system. We can also have or ask or figure out a way to have like the Freedom Fund come into your jurisdiction and provide, I guess, that Band-Aid for what we currently have to live with today. And it's interesting, you know, this conversation about like this, like what the Freedom Fund has now kind of unearthed. You know, there are people who say, "Oh my God, I can't believe somebody, you know, got out and they posted cash bail." But that's their right; it's in the Constitution. So it's interesting just to hear some of the community reaction from the very, very broader community that may not have impact with respect or have lived experience with the cash bail system. And I think that's something that we need to reckon with as well, in which I think it just calls for a change, a dramatic change, an elimination of the cash bail system, and for all of us as a state to come together and to figure out something that would be different, more equitable, and would lead to the outcomes that we would all want.
Thank you, County Attorney. David?
I want to ask a question of Mr. Choi. So you've been consistent in your message, I know, for the last at least 55, 60 months. And I don't know before that, but I know since I've become familiar with you, you've been consistent in your message. I can't imagine that everybody in your office buys into what you're doing right now. So what kind of pushback are you getting? I would suspect that there are prosecutors that are still in there asking for the highest amounts of bail and everything else. So what kind of pushback are you doing and how are you addressing that pushback?
Yeah, David, thanks so much for that question. I mean, that's something that me and my colleagues from around the country who are in the networks that I belong to of progressive prosecutors, that's one of the things that we struggle with the most. You can have all of these policies, which I do, many of them, but culture will eat policy for lunch any day. And so a big part of that is working with your staff to understand why we need to enact these policies, why we need to implement them. And the reality is as the chief prosecutor, you know, there's a lot of things that might be happening when I'm not looking, right? But we can work on that, and we can work on, first of all, I think you got to say these things out loud so that it's clear what the expectation is. And the second thing is, there needs to be work put into advancing the conversations in an office around race equity, understanding, like, for instance, the predatory nature of the cash bail system. You know, I listened to a presentation by Professor Joshua Page, and it really changed me because I learned about things I had no idea that were being experienced by the community. And as I have had conversations with people who have been impacted by that, I became stronger in my feelings about that. But that journey that I've been on, it's really important that, like, the people in my office can also have opportunities to be trained and to take that journey. And so we're doing a lot of work working with the Vera Institute for Justice to work with our staff to develop that capacity. I believe that that type of work is just as important as the work that we do to train a prosecutor to be a great trial attorney, to be able to know how to convince a jury, to introduce evidence, etc. That training is just as important as the work that needs to happen now with respect to understanding a lot of these emergent issues around race equity, about the harm that enforcing our laws have done to communities, and how we need to be thinking about how we use our discretion in a different way to recognize that we don't just represent victims, we actually represent the entire community, which includes offenders, those who are accused of crimes. And so that's the work that really I think is really critical in these offices. And if you do that, it's not going to happen overnight. But over time, I think that what we're trying to do is change the culture. That really, really matters at the end of the day. And so, David, thank you for calling that out, because that's very, very true. We shouldn't just think about the person at the top, but we need to think about the people that are doing this particular work.
And Prince, sorry, David, were you going to follow up? I think you asked about the folks that people can reach out to. And I think one thing that's important to remember is that, you know, judges are making these bail decisions in empty courtrooms for the most part. And they're making these bail decisions without a lot of observation, right? There's very little bail appeals that happen, right? And there are a lot of reasons for that. If a judge denies somebody's request for a lowered bail, then the person remains in custody and they want to get their case resolved as quickly as possible if there's any hopes that they get out of custody. And so the timeline to appeal that judge's bail decision is limited, right? And so because of that, there's not a lot of appellate review of bail decisions. And the community, for the most part, there's not a lot of people in the courtroom watching judges make those decisions. And so I think, you know, there have been lots of really effective court watch programs across the country, and people should consider going to court and watching the judges make these decisions. We've seen in San Francisco that their court watch program really affected the way that decisions were made in courtrooms. There's an organization called Silicon Valley Debug. They do a lot of work around criminal justice reform, and they've had a robust court watch program. And they've seen that when community members come out and pay attention to what judges are doing, that judges are more thoughtful about the bail amounts that they set.
So I don't want to jump back and forth, but so Mr. Choi, I'm definitely not trying to beat up on you. I just want to get clarification so I can better answer the questions that people are posing. Do people underneath you have more power to say the hell with your recommendation than you have to enforce it? That's the simple question. It's not about you, it's just about how we strategize to address it. So could you ask?
Well, I would say they have more power, but they, you know, are entrusted to carry out the policies, right? And so I suppose in some ways that depends on how people might exercise that discretion, because every policy is not necessarily going to be like, it's got, you know, it's like, it's, you know, justice isn't like a mathematical equation. It's, you know, 2 + 2 is 4. There's a lot of nuance to a lot of those things. And so I don't know exactly how best to answer your question, other than just to tell you the truth about the dynamic that exists, that the cultural piece within any system or organization can be more powerful than the chief prosecutor's policy. I think, yeah, I mean, I think there's that reality, but that can be addressed over time. And what that is just to recognize that the people that might be doing something maybe different is not necessarily for bad intention, but to recognize that we need to invest in training and education and helping people understand the reasons why it's so important that we would be thinking about community perspective. Because at the end of the day, the work that happens in a system and the work that happens in a prosecution office or in a police agency really belongs to the people, right? And so we have to be connecting to that value and the things that the people want, and to make sure that that's happening in the organization. And if you ultimately report to an elected official, you know, you should be looking to the elected to kind of understand that. But the reality is, I can't be involved with every decision that happens in my organization.
Thank you.
Thank you. And David, what I hear you saying is that, like, even though there can be leaders who are in certain organizations that are like really pushing this movement and really pushing reform, there's still people within those organizations and systems who really have their own personal reasons why they want to push back. Natasha, like in pushing the public health issue of this piece, what opposition like have you been faced with, like as you're trying to get people to come alongside you, and what has been your experience like within that same frame?
Yeah, I mean, I think a major thing that always comes up with public health regulation and public health communication and policy is just this idea of, a lack of resources, or, the cost of doing things differently. And the thing about public health right now is that it's riding on this wave of all the work that's been done, that Jared spoke to for a very long time, because public health is rooted in inequity in general. And so, we run into a lot of opposition when it comes to us talking about specific things like, either taking a product off the market, taxing a product, whatever. There's always, there's always that argument about it's either too expensive, or it's going to take away from revenue, which typically also isn't even reallocated to public health, even if it's coming from public health. But I think a big issue that we face is this conversation of just there being a limitation on resources, and this mindset of there's not enough to do what you want to do. And so I think the example of the public health, racism as a public health emergency crisis, that is really showing that there are many solutions that either come at no cost, or come at a cost that is not as substantial as people think. So for example, I think Mr. Choi brings up a really interesting point where we're talking about, external policy, right? We're talking about abolition, we're talking about cash bail, we're talking about all of these things that can be directed by policy. But then also internally, that's external policy. It's what we consider to be external policy. But these racism as a public health emergency issues and action items can also impact internal workings and internal policy. So for example, a low cost option to addressing things like cash bail, wealth disparities, et cetera. For example, at a state level, you can implement a committee in different, a committee that always looks at everything that comes out of OMB, for example, that is focused on racial and health equity. So there's always a lens to every piece of policy that comes through during the legislative process before anything comes out and externally impacts the public. You can also, within these racism as a public health emergency action items, require certain things of the government. So for example, equity and inclusion training is, I think a popular thing that a lot of people are doing, but it's certainly not enough, because we know at the end of the day that people are going to do their own thing when they're like Mr. Choi said, when the person above them, or when the policy is not hanging directly over their head. And so, there are creative solutions to address the internal workings to ensure that there's genuine equity commitment within an organization, within a government entity, that you can do through these action items. And I think that's really important as well, because if you have, for example, prosecutors who may not understand, but I think some, don't care about the impact that they have and through the work that they do, or may not feel that they are, if there's nobody in the room seeing what they're doing, that there's no impact. And so there are things that you can do from an internal policy perspective in these racism as a public health emergency action items that can affect the internal workings as well as the external workings. And so when we're talking about the kind of the opposition that we get is typically from industry, whether it's like the tobacco industry or, all these other major industries that create public health problems, whether it's related to the environment or whatever. And so a lot of those talking points are about business and money and, a lack of to be able to do what we want to do. And so those we can always counter with the idea of advancing public health is a money saver. It's always a money saver. It reduces healthcare costs. It increases workplace efficiency. There are many reasons why advancing public health in general is less expensive in the long run. And so those are, typical talking points that we use. But I do think it's important to not only focus on external policy, but also internal policy and address that opposition there too.
Thanks so much, Natasha. And real quick, we have like about 3 minutes left and really want to engage those who are attending. There was a question that Zach had put out to everyone, and really to utilize the chat feature of those who are on Zoom attending. Zach says that one concern that might be growing is that if we eliminate cash bail, judges may order defendants to be held instead of released back into the community. How do we mitigate the reaction to the elimination of cash bail? So for those who are attending, who are on the Zoom, put in your responses to share with one another, because there's a lot of people here and you all have so much collective wisdom. So some closing remarks. We want to limit this to about 30 to 45 seconds. And I want to start with David.
I was gonna pass on the closing remarks because I'm on the second afternoon panel. So I'd rather leave that in 30 seconds to somebody else.
Thank you. Jared?
Thanks. Yeah, my closing remarks would just be that I think that this conversation should be framed by the fact that prisons always do more harm than prisoners. And by that, I mean that prisons always do more harm than the people that we put in them would have done in the community, even for folks that are dangerous. I mean that categorically. And when we talk about bail reform, when we talk about bail abolition and doing away with this system, all that we are saying is that poor people should be treated as though they pose the exact same amount of risk to society as rich people. That's all we're saying. And so to stop doing risk assessments that categorize poor people differently. And so when we stop using wealth as a marker of value, and we stop using wealth as an indicator of somebody's value to society, and change the way that we look at human potential and disassociate your financial standing and the financial standing of the people that support you, then we will actually respect the value of everyone that comes into the system. And so we're not, bail abolitionists are not asking for some, we're not asking to shake the foundations of our society and the way that we structure things. We're asking for people to actually embrace the notion that value and wealth have nothing to do with each other when it comes to humans.
Thank you, Jared. And then County Attorney Choi, about 30 seconds for her closing comments.
Yeah, I'll just end by saying thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation, and wanted to encourage all of you on this call to continue that advocacy. And so to talk to your legislators, to talk to your elected chief prosecutor, to talk to your sheriff, who also happens to have powers with respect to how they operate the jail. And so all of that, I think nothing will change unless people have these conversations. And I hope that if there are people who are in systems on this call, who work for the government, that we think about ways to work with communities by actually seeking impacted voices out, and to bring them to the table, or allow them to be at the table and share your power and design things along with communities that have been most impacted.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone truly enjoyed. Thank you, County Attorney Choi. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Jared. And thank you, special guest panelist David as well. So I'm going to turn this over back to Ray from the Hamlin.
I've been lucky and have good advocacy and have people step up in times when I needed bail and things like that. But I've also seen people who literally shouldn't have been arrested, sitting in jail and plead guilty to something they had nothing to do with, just so they can get to work tomorrow. It's rough. So that's me, and I'll pass on.
Yes, I think Leslie is on as well, joining us. Hello, Leslie.
Grace and peace, Queen. Don't complain. Activate.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I just asked a question about.
I heard
you heard it. Perfect.
I heard you. Yep. And you know, this topic is very near and dear to my heart because unfortunately we live in America where Black people are still enslaved, right? I don't think slavery ever ended in America, and our criminal injustice system has just extended that, right? And I think when we're talking about the cash bail system, it's a real prime example of how we make it a crime to be in poverty in America, right? It's heartbreaking, you know what I mean, that you would have a situation like Kalief Browder in New York City, right? And he would have to sit in jail for 3 years for a crime that he did not commit because his family could not raise $3,000, right? And then on the other side, you have a young teen, Kyle Rittenhouse, who went and murdered people in Wisconsin, in a state that he didn't even live in, taking a gun that he shouldn't have even had, and millions of dollars were raised for him, right? Like that just shows what we are dealing with. And if people don't really understand how the 13th Amendment really extended slavery and quote unquote abolished slavery, but created a caveat saying except if you're duly convicted of a crime, and now we see a mass incarceration of those same, or the descendants of those same people, how that is an injustice, we need to wake up. We need to recognize that we still want Black people in bondage because it is profitable, right? That corporations are making millions and billions of dollars on the backs of Black people, on American soil, the quote unquote land of the free. Mm-hmm. So when I say don't complain, activate, you know, shout out to my Minnesota people. If you all don't know about don't complain, activate, you need to look it up. It's real activation, and ending this cash bail system is just long overdue. So that's grace and peace. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we have Marcus with us as well. Marcus, will you take that question? If you're talking, you're on mute.
I believe Marcus was pulled into a conversation and he'll be with us shortly.
Oh, okay, great. Who else is with Octavia is with us? I think Octavia, you're going to be moderating, but would love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, my name is Octavia, she, they pronouns. I'm an abolitionist. And I think, you know, how I came to this work, I'd previously been focusing on a lot of focusing on prisons and the work that was kind of happening around solitary confinement, the ombudsman for Minnesota, and how to create some level or increase the level of humanity in those situations. And then, you know, it kind of just pivoted where I was like, the on-ramping of how folks even end up in those situations happens at the bail level and then happens at the policing level, right? So people get picked up, they then get charged with something that they did or did not do, right? And then are placed in a system that says you can only get out of pretrial detention if you pay, right? And so this is, we call this ransom, it's by no other name, right? And really seeing the impact of folks before, you know, before the uprising, before the murder of George Floyd, our average bail was something like $78. We were paying to get people, to free people because they couldn't afford to post for a bail that was $78, right? And the implications of not being able to afford, to be detained, not just within the criminal system, but the legal, the immigration system as well, is that your outcomes for having a positive trial or a conclusion of your trial where cases are dismissed or your charges are dismissed dramatically decreases, And we saw that within the first 48 hours, if people weren't getting out, then their chances of one, taking a plea deal were increased. And then two, they were just like, they were willing to do almost anything in terms of, you know, getting rid of their public defense, taking a plea deal, posting bail to a bail bondsman, sacrificing like generational wealth in order to get out. And the implications of that keeps going, right? Like we see the impact of that. So that's like kind of why I got into this work. And in my role, I'm the board president of the Minnesota Freedom Fund. We've been around since 2016. We're tapped into a larger network, the National Bail Fund Network, which really says that the role of community bail funds, local bail funds, is to center the fact that people going through this, the folks who are directly impacted, have the most experiential knowledge and should lead the work.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much, Octavia. I'm also thinking you brought in part of your introduction was to say that you're an abolitionist. And so maybe we could take a moment to this, you know, the title of this kind of conference is Abolition and the Money Bail System. And I'm wondering for each of you, if you might say a little bit about either for you, Octavia, maybe you can just kick us off here around what you mean when you say you're an abolitionist, what that means for you in practice. And then I would love to hear from other people when you either hear abolition or PIC abolition, prison industrial complex abolition, what does that mean for you? What does that mean to you? So we'll start off there and then maybe Leslie will go second and then David.
Yeah, so for me, when I say abolitionist, I mean that I am for the freedom of Black people in all avenues. And that to me particularly looks like abolishing the prison industrial complex, right? But it's not just that, it's the education complex that puts Black children and Black boys and Black girls to have disparate outcomes, that disciplines them as being the problem instead of being the solution to education. Like it is the systems and where we operate that housing drastically limits, or the way that housing affects Brown and Black folks is disparate to white bodies, right? And so for me, abolition is to strive for freedom in all its forms that benefit the Black community, but also benefit those who have historically been marginalized.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Leslie?
Thank you. And Octavia, I don't know how we have never connected. That's just the craziest thing to me, but we must connect.
We have met, but we need to talk some more.
Like sit down and really connect. Okay, so abolitionists, you know, I cannot wait till we're able to abolish all of these systems that are currently enslaving Black people, Black and brown people, and poor white people, just so we all on the same page, right? It's a lot of people that is currently enslaving. And, you know, I tell people, I don't believe slavery has ever ended in America. I believe that we are still on a plantation. And so therefore, each of us have a role. Some of us are overseers, you know, some of us are field slaves, some of us are house slaves, and I like to say I'm a runaway. So when I say I want to abolish the system, I'm trying to, you know, not just run off the plantation, because that's one thing, but to actually go back and help my brothers and sisters like Harriet, right? I see myself like Sojourner Truth, who I love, and so many other strong Black men and women who have constantly been trying to abolish this system that is literally taking our breath. When we talk about Brother George Floyd, when we talk about Breonna Taylor, when we talk about Ahmaud Arbery, I need people to recognize that the knees that were on their neck exist on our necks as well, right? And so when I think about abolishing, it's like getting rid of these systems that have their knees on the necks of Black and brown people. And like Octavia said, it's not just the criminal justice system. I think that's the most blatant one that we can relate it to, but it's the education system, it's the health system, it's the housing system, it's literally every system that exists in America. And so, yeah, that's my take.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And we're joined now by Marcus, who was able to get off his meeting. And so Marcus, welcome. We're so happy to have you. Before we go to David, Marcus, will you introduce yourself a little bit to the folks on this call and meeting? and let us know kind of why you do the work that you do. You might be on mute. Great.
Sorry about that. I'm all new to this technology. I just got out of prison after 11 years and some change. And even before that, I wasn't really too tech savvy or anything like that. My name is Marcus Nadeau. I grew up on a reservation up north. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Good? All right, cool. So I grew up on a reservation up north. I'm a member of the Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians. And I'm new to all this information that you guys are talking about, you know, like my lifestyle. I grew up in an environment where crime was desensitized, you know, and that was a way of life for most of my people, especially my family members. And I wasn't really too much concerned about the impact of my my lifestyle, you know, on my community and everything like that until when I just recently got indicted and incarcerated on a federal sentence for federal charges. And I was able to think about like a lot of different stuff about my childhood. Well, mainly I came across a lot of different books that allowed me to have a paradigm shift in my thinking. You know, I was able to read up on my people's history, about, you know, some of the things that Miss Susie talked about in the very beginning with the Native history and the struggle that took place here in Minnesota. You know, I was able to be more aware of that and what really actually happened with, you know, the government and the boarding school system and how that affected, you know, my great-great-grandparents and my grandparents and my father and them and how they were raised. And I started to understand social conditioning and environmental influences. Not only that, I was able to understand generational trauma, historical trauma and generational depression that affects Native American communities, especially mine back home. And so I wanted to do something about that, you know. And so in prison, I just kept reading and I kept educating myself and going to different programs. I became a member of the Toastmasters International. And with David, I was able to join restorative practices. And I was able to go out and, you know, speak to the youth and educators about my background and who I was and some of the misguidance and miseducation that I received growing up on my reservation and in my family household, you know, and kind of relate to them on a level of what it feels like to be raised in a dysfunctional environment and having these, you know, these issues with depression and grief and low self-esteem and, you know, all these different things, you know, and that's why I got into this kind of line of work. Speaking to youth or just anybody in general about addiction, overcoming like the criminal mindset, things like that. So I'm really happy to be here. And David, you know, I want to thank him for, you know, inviting me to this group here. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcus. It's an honor to have you here. And I'm so glad that you raised the issue of Indigenous peoples and the kind of, you know, the criminalization and the attempted elimination of Indigenous peoples on this land. One of the things that I constantly bring up to people is the fact that the people who are actually most likely to be killed by law enforcement in this country are Indigenous people, disproportionately compared to even to Black folks here. And that's something that people don't really know. The people who are actually most likely to be disproportionately incarcerated in the United States is also Indigenous people. We don't really talk about that enough. And I think it's so important to have you here, to have your voice here and your presence here. So thank you. David, I wonder if you can speak not just to abolition, but Marcus just mentioned that you brought him in to restorative practices. Can you talk a little bit about restorative justice and its role in the work that you do and why you care about restorative justice?
And my mind's going, listen to everybody, like my mind goes way too fast to try to focus on one thing, but I'll try.
Okay.
So I went into prison on August 19th of 2016 in the federal prison system and was released from the BOP on November 13th, so a few weeks ago. But I had spent the last, from May 18th until November 13th, I was on home confinement, still under the custody of BOP. Prior to going in, me, and for some of the people on the call who know who Dr. Raj is, me, Dr. Raj, Dr. Theresa Libby, we started a conference called Understanding and Responding to Mass Incarceration. I had met Jason Soul, Dr. Soul, a couple times before that. And even though Jason is 10 times my junior, I look at him as quite a mentor. So he's kept me abreast of a lot of things that was happening when I was locked up. Dr. Octavia kept me abreast of a lot of things when I was locked up. But sometimes we talk about restorative and rehabilitate, and sometimes it's to habilitate. We're not restoring because we didn't start in a good place, right?
Thank you.
So, I mean, there's so much with language, even like Marcus talks about criminal thinking. They've criminalized our lifestyle so much, right? We need to understand that the criminal justice system is criminal in its administration of justice. So restorative justice is trying to take that back out of their hands and restoring what's our heart and just restoring so much things, restore our community, restoring households. One of the things that really messed me up when I was in prison was my first 27 months at Sandstone, which is more prison. My last 18 months, I was at the federal prison camp, which is really luxury and was really reserved for people who don't pay, who cheat the government out of $15 million out of taxes. It was really reserved for a different type of person, right? Until the drug war said we got to put him somewhere. And I remember being in the TV room one day, and a guy came in who was older, he was 64 years old, older black dude, and came in and he had a different aura about him. He was a nurturer in a lot of ways, but he also threw his fishing line in a lot of different ponds trying to get somebody to argue with him. He was really mad at the way the younger generation of black people carry themselves, but he liked to argue. And one day I was sitting in the TV room and I missed mail call. So somebody brought some pictures in that came from the mail, and it was pictures of my daughter and her last weekend on a trip to Arizona. And we're looking at pictures, it's the black TV room. So you guys understand that everything is very siloed in prison, right? So it's a black TV room and we're passing around pictures. And Mr. Hall got up and walked out, and he came back with a photo album, and he was smiling. I never seen him in such a good mood, right? But he opened his photo album to the back and he said, "How old is your daughter?" And I said, "My daughter's 28. She's the same as my daughter." Showed me his daughter was 27. Then he showed me his twin daughters who were 21. He showed me his son who was 33. And I knew, it hit me right then looking at his photo album. We have a small photo album they sell in the Bureau of Prisons now, but people who came from higher prisons have a bigger photo album that they don't sell anymore. So I knew he came from a higher prison, and I knew he had been down a long time, but I didn't know how long. But I asked myself, how old were your kids when you got locked up? And he flipped that, it was like a phone book. And he flipped it to the front, and he said, "This is 2 weeks before I got arrested." And it was those twin 21-year-old beautiful girls were in a double stroller with their daughter, who was like 7.5 years old. And my daughter's a daddy's girl. And I don't want to swear, but in the name of academia and to put emphasis on how I feel, it fucked me up real bad. And so I can't stop doing this work. And when they keep talking that BS about passing the First Step Act and the CARES Act that came when COVID hit the prison, the man I'm talking about at that point, I think he was down 17, 18 years. And he has high blood pressure and diabetes, and he has a rare blood condition called polycythemia or something like that, where it produces an overabundance of red blood cells. So the way the prison camp is, there are like 4 town drivers, meaning inmates, residents, that will drive people around the town for things they need. So they would drive Mr. Hall to the hospital downtown Duluth, drop him off there. He'd be there for 3 or 4 hours. Then he'd call when he got done, they go pick him back up. He's not a threat to a community, right? But when this CARES Act happened to release people from prison, to thin out the prison because of COVID, his blackness wouldn't allow him to leave when she fit all the criteria. But like I said earlier, there was 35, 36-year-old young white people leaving who did no time yet. And this
is real.
It's too deep.
Yep. Thank you so much, David. So I'm supposed to throw over to Octavia, who is going to be taking you through the rest of this really wonderful panel. And I'm going to be heading out because I'm on a meeting in half an hour that I'm going to be leading. So I want to just thank every single one of you on this panel for your stories, for your work. You fuel me in my work. I see myself as a comrade to you all. And I hope that some of you I get to meet in person in like the near future. I love Minneapolis and Minnesota in general. I've been there several times. The last time I was there was for the Free Minds, Free People gathering, I think last year, maybe when pre-COVID time. So post-COVID time, I hope to get back up there and meet each of you and talk with you. Thank you for your work so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you in a major way, Miriam.
All right, bye.
Take care. Let's just give Miriam Cava like another big up. Like, fascinating speech. So glad to be in connection, having questions or being asked questions by her. You know, pre-order her book, but also want to lift up this book that already exists, and it's called Fumbling Towards Repair, a workbook for community accountability facilitators, and it's really steeped in restorative justice principles. And it talks why the prison industrial complex, ending the prison industrial complex makes sense. And so it's by Kaba and Shira Hassan, highly recommend. But yeah, I'll be the moderator today. I already introduced myself. My name is Octavia Smith, she, they. I'm the board president of Minnesota Freedom Fund, and I'm an abolitionist. I really want to, like, if you aren't already aware, that this panel highlights the perspectives of those with community expertise who are justice impacted, formerly incarcerated, Black, Native, and POC voices as well as those who are historically underlooked and marginalized. And the importance of these spaces really is to say, in so many ways, when we hear people talk about why they want prison reform or why they want, you know, to reform the police, they're coming at it from a lens that they don't actually experience the harm of those systems. And so we're talking about situating transformation and situating system change. It really needs to happen with the people who experience the harm. So just want to name the importance of that. All right, we'll get started. So this question will be for David and Marcus, and you can decide which way you want to answer. How has your experience with the justice system fueled your desire for abolition? What surprised you when navigating the prison industrial complex? In particular, the bail system, like if you were brought in through the bail system for some federal cases that might not exist. And what was the moment, like was there a key moment when you knew what you had been experiencing within prison was ultimately wrong? A lot of questions. Go ahead, David.
Go ahead, David.
I was really trying to defer to Marcus. It didn't take my own experience. You know, back in 1992, one of my best friends was kidnapped by the FBI after they found an informant to buy an ounce of powder cocaine from him. Then they did it again, and then the third time they asked him to cook it because they didn't know how to cook it, and that was the time. They could arrest him after the first time, right? But they wanted that crack cocaine. They wanted that 28 grams of crack to be the equivalent of more than 1.5 kilos or almost 1.5 kilos of cocaine, so they can give him all 15 years that he got. So I became, and like I said, I grew up in juvenile court and had quite a lot of instances as an adult. It's just bad on every front. I can't even explain it. I can't even really tell you how bad it was. I've had great advocacy. I had a state case in 2008 that I had, you know, I was fortunate enough to have the right lawyer in the right situation and ended up beating the case. And I had an 18-page ruling from a judge that made it too hard for the feds even to pick up the case. And then I had this case where I had a lawyer turn her back on me literally on the way to an evidentiary hearing. She said, I changed it's the lawyers are scared, right? In the feds, if you don't plead guilty, they will go ahead and they'll tell you, you know, we would charge your mom, we would charge your dad. There's just so much wrong with it. I don't mind the sacrifice. I don't think I should be absolved of my responsibilities, but we know for sure that the so-called drug war has been way more detrimental to community than any drugs have been themselves. And it didn't, I don't know, I went in there with my pen and my pad just because of prior experiences and things I was involved with. I walked in documenting from the very beginning. I recognize Marcus, to answer the last question that Miriam has talked, I recognize Marcus' leadership a long time ago. He just has never been exposed to it. So that was my way of passing the mic to Marcus so he can tell his story, how he felt about criminal justice.
Pass the mic.
That's you.
Okay. So I've been in and out of prison. You know, I went to the federal system 3 times, twice for separate cases, 2 different cases, and once for a violation. And both times I was in prison on a charge, serving a sentence. It was for crack cocaine. And that was my first experience with how the criminal justice system is racially, how it impacts people of color, you know, like minorities like myself. Because I was given a hefty sentence for 50 grams of crack. I was given a 240-month sentence, and that's basically a 20-year sentence. And they were able to use a statute that doubled my mandatory minimum based on my previous drug conviction for crack. So I see the racial disparities in there, because I was in the county jail for a whole entire year. Now I see some of my white peers in there as inmates, and the sentences they were getting, how they're being treated in the court system, you know, and they're getting lenient sentences. And I remember when I first got to the camp in Duluth after so many years, when they actually allowed everybody to be resentenced and released based on the new crack law. The first one to leave the compound was a white man, you know, and I seen all my other brothers struggle and try to give back their time, and they slow drag so many different individuals in there. Because I was a barber at the institution, I got to hear about this all the time. Gentlemen would be coming into the barbershop talking about how their judges is doing them in their districts and their regions and stuff like that. So I was able to see that racial disparity up front and personal, you know. When I got resentenced, I was expecting to get an immediate release, you know, based on the transformation that I underwent while I was in prison and some of the things I accomplished along my journey, you know, like being part of restorative practices and being able to go out and contribute to the community by giving my history and then my experience and trying to, you know, hopefully impact some youthful life. But the judge didn't take none of that into consideration. He didn't take my programming into consideration. Originally, he wanted to give me a 14-year sentence, and that was the man I was then, which was not the man I am today. And he basically told me that he was gonna give me the sentence he wanted to give me in the very, very first place. He could have let me out. And so, you know, and also, while I was incarcerated, I fought my case because I went to trial and I was doing all my appeals and everything like that. I had strong case law in order to overturn my conviction, get back into court and go to trial. But they just shut me down through, you know, whether it was Donovan Frank and on a district level, or whether it was in, you know, the regional level, they shut me down all the way. And so I had to sit out my whole entire time. My thoughts about abolishing the criminal justice system is that, you know, it does need to be replaced, and it needs to be, my thoughts, at least because I was exposed to restorative practices, I think it needs to be replaced by a scaled up version of restorative practices, you know, implemented on a national level. And what I mean by levels is there's 3 different levels that it could be implemented on. It could be implemented socially, relationally, and individually. And when you think about that, I want you to think about the old adage that it takes a village to raise a child. And you think about our villages today. What are our villages? They are our neighborhoods and our communities. So if these villages are broken, sick, and dysfunctional, what is that saying about the children being raised, like myself? We're broken, sick, and dysfunctional. And so on those 3 levels is social, relational, and individual. And in a way, all of us here today, were once those children being raised in those villages, you know, and like David and I, we struggled and we had, you know, we had issues growing up and we became what our environment was, you know. And for me and him, that change has to start on an individual level. We have to learn these values that restorative practices teaches, which is respect, trust, care, and humility. And if a child is raised with those values instilled in them, then they're going to grow up to more than likely be a really productive member of society and a good man, a good person. I was raised in a lawless household, you know, and I was not aware of any principles, morals, or values coming from a Ojibwe perspective or just a human perspective, you know. My parents didn't teach me none of that stuff. And I understand why. I know the history behind them and the way they were raised. So I get that. I get why they're dysfunctional. I get why I was dysfunctional. And what I did about that is that I studied my history. And you see this tattoo on my face right here? That represents the principles, morals, and values that I live by today. I'm Ojibwe, and my people have what they call the 7 grandfather teachings, which is kind of equivalent to the 10 steps in the Bible. And so that's how I carry myself today. I got these 7 principles that guide me each and every single day. How I interact with staff, how I interact with people in the community, my peers around me, while I'm at work, everything that I do in my relationship with my fiance, all these things. But I never had that growing up. But had I had that growing up, I definitely would have been a different person. And had my parents had that growing up, they would be a different person. But all of that was systematically taken from my people during the boarding school era. You know, when our culture, our religion, our value system, everything that we identified as being Indian was outlawed. And that's when historical trauma, generational oppression really did a number on my people. We lost our language, we lost that spiritual foundation, that cultural identity. We didn't have that growing up, and that affected a lot of us at a very young age, especially me. You know, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and the only culture that I was aware of is the drug culture and the gang culture. And that's what I became. I became what they call a Native American gangster, you know. And behind that life, I did a lot of damage. With the cash bail system, I experienced it on 3 different levels. I experienced it on a tribal level, state level, and on the federal level. And with each different level came a different form of expense and severity. On the tribal level, you could bail out, your bail could be anywhere from $50 to $5,000. On the state level, it could be anywhere from $5,000 to $500 plus, you know. And on the federal level, you're either going to get a bond or you're not. And that goes, you know, they judge you based on, you know, what you've been in jail for before, who are you, your ethnical background, all these different things, you know. And so I never got a federal bond. I did bond out on my state charges. I ended up beating my state charges, but I had to pay a heavy price in order to do that. You know, like my bail was 100,000, so I had to come up with 10 grand, and I had to bail myself out and my co-defendant out, and his was 100 grand. And if I was not in the streets doing what I was doing, I was never gonna have that kind of money. But I did have that kind of money laying around, and so I was able to bail out, and I was able to get us lawyers and stuff like that and fought our cases. And so I experienced that on that level, on those different levels, and at the time, I was grateful for it. You know, I wanted to get out of jail, but now I'm exposed to this new information, and I'm being aware of a whole entire different way of looking at the system. I hope that we can come up with a solution, a resolution that will allow more people with less severe crimes to actually not have to go to jail. You know, but that's pretty much all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you, David. I think like one of the things that I want to just recirculate is something that David and Mollenkof said about the system itself, right? That it criminalizes people so that inherently there isn't, you know, rehabilitation, right? And we start talking about prisons, jails, the police as being reform proof, because their very existence was created to suppress and oppress Black, Native, and other people of color. Like, that is the basis of their history. So you can't take someone who has the history of doing, or something that has the history of doing this thing that is inherently oppressive, and try to fix it. It's operating well. It's doing what it needs to do very well. And so when we're thinking about abolition, I think that that's something that we have to name and keep in mind. And I think with that question, this question is open. With that being said, this question is really open to anybody. What do you think are the limitations, the consequences, or obstacles of our current system? How do we, and I think, Marcus, you answered some of that. How do we how can these be transformed through abolition? So what are the limitations, consequences, or obstacles of our current system? And how can they be transformed through abolition? Leslie, this is also for you if you want to jump in.
I mean, I would love if David or Marcus spoke to it. I always try to defer. You all can speak to it first if you all want.
Go ahead, David. Take the
I'm trying not to go
bull
first.
by the horns.
I'm trying not to go first for a variety of reasons. I want Leslie to educate me some.
David, play. David, let me turn my camera back on. Hold on 1 second. David, you've been going to church, okay? I've been getting educated by you.
For
One thing
real.
I want to say, really quick, because, and I don't know who spoke to this earlier, but I think too often we do have people talking that are not directly impacted and involved. While I don't talk about it, I do talk about it, but people might not know this. The reason why I'm a lawyer is because I grew up in the inner city of Washington, D.C. and watched people my whole life, my family and my friends in my neighborhood be incarcerated. And everyone that was incarcerated looked like us. And everybody on the other side didn't look like us, right? And I remember in 4th grade, I asked my big mom, I said, Big Mom, I had a favorite cousin, his name was Kevin. I said, Big Mom, who decided if Kevin go to jail or not? And she said, the judge. And so in 4th grade, that's when I decided that I was going to go to law school and become the change that I wanted to see. And years before I was even born, his mother, my Aunt Renee, she actually went to prison. And I remember always seeing a picture of her growing up, and she had on blue, and she was in the yard, right? As a kid, you don't know that they was in the yard, but now I know the picture from her being in the yard. And it was because an older Black man in our family had raped her, and she shot him, and then she ended up in prison, right? And so for me, while I only went to jail once, and it was for Breonna Taylor, and it was voluntary, I have been impacted by the criminal justice system in so many ways, but I also acknowledge that I am not David, and I'm not Marcus, and I'm not my Aunt Renee, and I'm not Kevin. And, for anybody who's watching, it is very important for us to let people tell their own stories and to be experts in their own rights, because we have way too many people coming in our communities. Because I believe that I can even speak to this, just so we're clear. I believe I can speak to it because I have been deeply impacted by it. However, there's still levels to this. And we have people who have no relationship to the criminal justice system or unjust system, but yet they are the first ones to turn on their mics. And so I would urge anybody here today, the best advice that I could give to them, David, is to sometimes be quiet and mute your mic and let the people who are the true experts and who have truly been impacted say their piece.
Just big ups to that part, Leslie. I think it's hard pressed to find any Black person, right, who doesn't have some connection to the system. And like you, I have similar things. And even in like the humility to even name, like, we are impacted and still there are levels, is something that I think we need to like really sit with and have people who have no connection to this work really understand what their role as an ally is, right? No performative BS, no taking the space. So just want to reiterate. But David, Marcus.
Sure, I'll go. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So with me, my fight really is, it's back home on where I grew up. It's back home in my community, and it's with my family. Okay, the way my family thinks, and the way they conduct themselves, and their understanding about their environment, who they are as a person, as a Native American person, and some of our history. They don't know why they feel the way they do. They don't know why our environment is the way it is, but they need to get a greater understanding in order to make some significant changes as a person and grow, and they also need to learn about, the seventh grandfather teaching, something that can guide and direct them, So for me, because I come from a family of criminals, I was raised that going to prison it's a fact of life, and it's gonna happen no matter, it's gonna happen sooner or later, okay? And I was well aware of that at a young age. And so to me, prison is in place for people like my family, people who commit like major crimes, selling drugs on a major scale, hurting people, shooting people. I come from a family of violent criminals, One of my relatives even shot a judge, and I had 3 different relatives die by police shootings. They got killed. One's even on YouTube, and that was just most recent, like about a year and a half ago. It's on YouTube, and they shot him right there in Bemidji, Minnesota. But being a mixed, Ojibwe and white, I was able to experience some of the favoritism in prison because of me being, a little white. I was able to communicate more with the administration, as a leader. They always came to me for to solve some kind of problems within the Native community. And I'm a natural leader, by nature anyway. Where I was growing up, I always found myself in leadership positions, whether it was in the streets or in prison. And being white was a plus, in the prison system, because certain CEOs and administration members like the warden, people with those kind of positions would respect me more. They'll listen to me more, and they treat me differently. Does something need to change? Absolutely. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, you for sure did. David?
Drop the mic. That was great, Marcus. Come on, David.
Really?
Take it home.
David, so restate the question so I don't run too far down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. So what do you see as the limitations, the obstacles, or the consequences of our current justice system or criminal legal system? How can those be transformed through abolition?
So when you say limitations of the justice system, how can I say this? There really are no limitations to the justice system. They do what they want. And it's what Marcus was talking about, he had case law that supported overturning his conviction. One thing we learned in the federal system is it says the United States against Tucson David Starks, right? It doesn't say those punk ass judges. It says the United States. These motherfuckers take down countries. So no matter what case law you're standing on, they will bend it. It's almost like right now with this political environment we're in right now, right? Every Democrat can't agree with everything Joe Biden says, right? They can't agree with everything Trump says, but people will they'll say the craziest shit to justify the person they're arguing with. And that's exactly what happens when you stand in front of that federal judge. The police didn't have a reason to stop me. The shit they used to get in my car was because the police said he seen a business card from a bonding company that told the police that I was engaged in illegal activity. It's like the stupidest shit they use. So there are no limitations. What we need a justice system that is full of liberation. That has as much liberation as they have lack of limitation. And I'm going to go off for a minute because I just think about how it chases us down at every step, right? So, and there hasn't been a lot of talk about it. So you heard about this First Step Act. So Marcus got sentenced shortly before President Obama signed the Fair Sentence Act of 2010. But when he signed it, it didn't go retroactive. So that 50 grams that Marcus had was 5,000 grams, right? That's how they had it on the table. So that plus his prior conviction gave him 20 years. The First Step Act that Trump signed, didn't do no work on, he signed. First off, you have to understand, Minnesota has become the up South, right? You're in a federal prison. We're in a prison with people from all over the place. But Minnesota, the District of Minnesota was not granting people their motions. It allowed it to go retroactive. It didn't mandate that it went retroactive. It was still at the judge's discretion. So Marcus is one of the few people that benefited in where we were at, who was from Minnesota, and he felt guilty. It was like he couldn't even celebrate that he was getting out, right? Because he had his brothers who were stuck there. There are a couple brothers, Derek and Antoine Spencer, who were outstanding businessmen. They were entrepreneurs. They sold dope, but they were entrepreneurs. They had a Harold's Chicken over North Minneapolis. They had a good record label. They were businessmen. They were just in the wrong business. But what they got convicted at trial for was selling 252 grams of cocaine. That's what they got convicted at trial for. After they got convicted in front of a jury, the probation department came back with a pre-sentence investigation report that was 200 something kilos of cocaine. They got like 27 years. The jury didn't see this. The jury convicted them. So you have all these different things. The First Step Act had within it the retroactivity of the Fair Sentences Act. At that point was less than 4,000 people who would still benefit. And not many people benefited, right? If they say a reduced sentence, they didn't get out. They got a reduced sentence. Then it had within it a component where you can earn like 10 days off your sentence for every 30 days of programming, right? So the BOP, William Barr and his BO came in, they created a system called Pattern, the Prisoner Assessment Tool targeting estimated recidivism needs. Who do you think it targeted? Who do you think it targeted? They came up with these. So when it targets you, it's okay, so you're ineligible to get any benefits from this program. But what you can do, you can work real hard to spend an extra $150 in the commissary. You can work real hard, do all the same stuff, and earn the right to buy another 210 minutes of phone time at 21 cents a minute. And they don't have any educational programs. They dumped $75 million into it. The warden came into our prison and said, okay, let's use that money. Now, there wasn't people in education that wanted to do some good things with that money that would give us some real, like, let us go to the colleges nearby and gain some skills that we could use when we get out. The warden wanted to use the money to put a barista in prison to serve the staff. These systems, and for those who weren't on the call when I said earlier, when they started this lockdown on April 1st and all the entire BOP to say, okay, identify the people who are close in proximity to release, identify the people who have underlying health conditions that could succumb to COVID, and identify the people who are up in age that they can make them succumb to COVID, and start releasing them on April 15th. On April 1st, when they started, there was 472 people in the prison camp. Right now it's down to less than 285, but when I left, it went down to 400. Now, one Black person was released under them guidelines, and there was plenty of Black people who were sick. So it's like everything looks better than what our system is. But you can't trust them. Just like you can't trust them with the intentions of the First Step Act. They took that whole thing and turned it into some whole different shit to make money for them again. And it also expanded the prison industries again. Everything about it is to make money. They sacrificed, okay, let's reduce the sentence of about 3,700 people. And after that, it's going to rope everybody back in again. So you can't trust them to reform a system. You only trust us to get rid of it.
David, can I just add quick? I know it's time to wrap up. I just want to say a quick thing. This is where you turn your mic back on. And this is where you amen everything that they did, because David hit the nail on the head. And I think that it's very important that we echo those sentiments, because unfortunately, because of respectability politics in America, they'll take things, and this is why I say I believe God kept my record clean, because I love that we are all criminals, because we all could have got caught up. Amen. Especially me living in the inner city of DC. But I believe he allowed me to become a lawyer and enter some of these, to be able to echo David's same sentiments, because we know for far too long, and Michelle Alexander talked about this in her book, New Jim Crow, we will label people crazy and label these conspiracy theories, when in actuality, everything David said is 100% correct. And we need people with their degrees and over years to step out of their box and start echoing the same points that David and Marcus are making, because too often when we are privileged by a system and when we have privilege, we don't speak out against the injustices because we're not being directly impacted. But it only takes one incident, one day, one police encounter for you to end up in the same situation. Just remember that.
I want to just add this point too, I think, to speak on what David and Marcus were talking about, like, and even you guys, like, the system is created so that it still functions, right? Where you have, to Marcus's point, like, still, like, you're in, you know, Stillwater, Minnesota, and they didn't have a prison, and then they built a prison, and now they have a Walmart, they got a mall, they got all these things, because all the people there who work there now need a place to shop. And so their whole economy is now based on a prison. This also happens in our jails, right? Where the fines that the bails that people are charged goes sometimes, in some situations, goes directly into the fines and fees of the court. So it is like these things, as well as when police stop people for traffic stops, that goes to their bottom dollar. And so to think that these things aren't divorced, right? That there's this notion of there are bad guys and we are getting the bad guys, when it actually is there's money and we are getting the money, right? And that is the reality of these systems. So I think that those things of like really changing the narrative of like people are, you know, less deserving or inherently criminal, when it's like the capitalistic nature of these systems, it's all about the money, period. Like, that's it. But I really wanted to wrap up before we open it up to questions. Just thank you, David, thank you, Marcus, thank you, Leslie, for really speaking truth to power, for really sharing. It's really humble to be a moderator of this place. All right, and we will open it up for questions.
And while we waiting for questions, I just wanted to echo David's sentiments and giving a major shout out to Dr. Raj. I love Dr. Raj, Jason Soul, Dr. Artika Tyner, right? A lot of these people who are using their positions to activate the community. And I also want to give a shout out to Mayan Burrell. We still screaming free Mayan Burrell. There's also a brother, and Octavia, I would love to talk to you more about this. There's a brother named Philip Vance, and his case hasn't gotten as much attention yet as Mayan Burrell. He's another brother who I believe is innocent. We know those gang task force units just wanted a warm body, and they didn't care which brown body they were getting. And so for anybody watching, it is time for us to rectify these situations. People have been serving 17 plus years for crimes that they didn't even commit. 17 years to me is too much time for anybody to, like, by that time you're a changed person, whether you did the crime or not. But especially if you did not do the crime, serving 17 years in prison is way too much. So we need to do our part, right? When I say that, I'm like, Harriet, that's what that's about. Helping to free our brothers and sisters that shouldn't even be on, nobody should be on a plantation, start there. But especially some of our brothers and sisters, we need to really have a rescue mission. So Octavia, I sent you my number, sis, call me.
We're gonna connect. I think that is such an important thing to uplift. Like, yeah, I'm not even gonna say anything else. I'm just gonna get to the questions. So this is a question here, and it's open to everybody. It says, how do we as community members and students amplify the voices of people who are directly impacted, just and impacted?
David, Marcus.
What do y'all need? Yeah, to feel supported, to feel, you know, given the space where y'all can actually do some things.
So,
well, go ahead, David.
No, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I insist.
Yeah.
All right, I got. He does this all the time. Me and him used to be in leadership position within the Toastmasters club over at the camp, and he used to do this all the time. Well, I would say that people who are more educated and more experienced with this fight could educate somebody like myself on how to maybe get my people's voices heard, you know, in my community where I'm from, Red Lake, you know, and like I actually want to do something to change things socially, and maybe even if I can, even judicially, if that's even possible, you know, for somebody like myself. Me, I'm more focused on social change in my environment where I'm from, you know, and that's primarily my fight. But there is people like me that want to do something about the judicial system. For me, I have a lot of ill feelings towards the judicial system because of the time I was given and the way that it impacted my family. You know, when I left to prison or to fight my case, I had a wife and children, you know, and during my prison sentence, I lost that. I got divorced, and now my children and I they're estranged. You know, they don't want nothing to do with me anymore. You know, I tried to contact them numerous times since I've been out the system, and they don't want nothing to do with me, man. And they were my heart, my daughters, my first daughters that I had. You know, they were daddy's girls, but now they don't like me. They hate me, and it's because of, you know, like I sat in prison fighting to get out of prison based on the new crack guidelines, but it took them over 10 years for them to resentence me. You know, I'm angry about that, you know. And so, like with me, my fight, I'd like to go back home and change things socially so they won't have to go through this system, because that's what's waiting for them on the other side of their consequences. And once they get in there and they got you good, and it's hard to get out. It's a hopeless feeling, you know. Go ahead, David.
So I'm reading questions. I'm reading a question from Andy Hall, was the last question, right? What kind of support do you think is most useful to have from people who not currently in the prison system? And what would have helped you during your prison sentence? For me, I was fortunate. I was at Sandstone, I was at Duluth. So I was with 90 minutes from the house and 2.5 hours from the house. I got visits. There's a lot of people don't get visits. People don't get letters. I mean, those things mean a lot. Like to see somebody run downstairs for mail call and stand there and their name never get called. That's hard to watch. I had a cellie that he's from the city. He just, and he had a lot of contact with people at home, but nobody visited him. Nobody sent him books. You know, I've been home, and that's something else that people don't understand about prison. All our systems are made. We expect people to come home and know how to have good relationships, but everything about our systems is about tearing people out of relationships, right? People in prison are like college roommates, or people in the military, or people who take road trips together and spend time together. Like, that's your prayer buddy. That's who you hug and cry with when they lose somebody or you lose somebody. And then when you get out of prison, it's a probation violation to contact them. They move around the prisons. I mean, I met people who I was locked up with a guy named Danelle Malone. He had 5 life sentences for conspiracy to distribute drugs. He had I can't remember if it was a 15 or 20 year sentence for attempted murder for hire. It wasn't, he got convicted by a jury of his co-defendant being on the phone, setting up, and the police did intercept it. So there was no shots fired or anything like that, but he got 15 or 20 years for that. But he got 5 life sentences for conspiracy to distribute drugs. And when there was a law that changed, I think in 2010 or 2012, so one of the life sentences came off of him, and because they were concurrent, they all came off of him. But I still see the pain in him thinking about the people who he was at the penitentiary with, who ain't never going home. People in prison need connection. The opposite. People talk about abolition. How do you address violent crime? And I don't know who said it, who coined the term, and they said hurt people hurt people. We're not doing any good by the way we respond to hurt people. We're just hurting more people in a bigger community. And I would encourage you guys to look up. Matter of fact, I'll drop it in the panelists to all attendees. Is the 1973 Community Corrections Act of 1973, which is a Minnesota act that got adopted nationwide. The Minnesota Department of Corrections understood very well where you saw community at, where you saw problems at. They're almost verbatim. And it says something to the effect that we know that crime is rooted in socioeconomic opportunities and since in community. And since that's where the crime happens, that's where crime should be solved. They say it does no good to take an offender and place them in an artificial, disoriented environment and leave them there for a number of years and expect them to return home well adjusted. And that's still in effect. We just don't use it. Instead, anytime there's a chance to expand the system and create more jobs, they take it, instead of eliminating the jobs that were supposed to do, they just expanded more jobs. And now these halfway houses have contracts with the same systems that are set up to keep us there. I got an email when I was in the halfway house that told me if I stop and get gas without getting prior approval, meaning 3 days in advance, they would start escape proceedings. It's ridiculous the things they do to maintain this structure, this carceral structure.
It's wild. I want to go back to that question though that someone asked in the chat, which is to say, they said, how would you respond to people who commit violent crimes should serve jail or prison sentence? How do we reconcile this with abolition? So what would you say to people who say violent crimes should? Yeah, go ahead, Leslie.
I just wanted to say something to the last question that they just answered. And what I would say to that, for me, again, and this is just my standpoint. I want people to get all of their rights back, right? Whether they was a quote unquote violent offender or non-violent, right? Like I believe that like being a quote unquote criminal, which I don't believe people are criminal. I think people quote unquote commit crimes, but I believe beyond that, our community is being criminalized. But being a quote unquote criminal is just like being the N-word now, right? Like literally that's all American. Same discrimination that we saw against Black people, we are seeing against people who now have criminal offenses on their record, right? And so I want you all to think about that. If you all don't think that we should be sitting in separate restaurants and separate schools and Black people are human, just like everybody else, if you think Black people are human just like everybody else, you should think that people with criminal records are human just like everybody else, no matter what crime they quote unquote committed. And because so many of our brothers and sisters didn't even commit the crimes that they have been convicted for, I really caution y'all to be careful about how y'all articulate these points, right? Second, I just wanted to go back to what they were saying before, both David and Marcus, about how you can help people. Our brothers and sisters incarcerated, because even though we can say Black people all are connected to the criminal justice system, I think it's truth to that, because we know Black people, Native people, people of color are more impacted. Black people in poverty are the most impacted, right? Let's be very clear that all Black people are not similarly situated in America, right? Like it is very much so a correlation that I'm from the inner city, that I have so much relationship to people who are incarcerated, right? And so there are some of y'all, whether you Black, white, whatever race you are, y'all are very connected and y'all are very privileged. And who much is given, much is expected. This is not charity work. This is God's work. This is real work. You need to use your connections. You need to use your resources, right, to help our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated or who have recently tried to reintegrate back into society, right? Like you don't have the luxury to just keep all your resources to yourself. Like especially our white brothers and sisters, like Marcus was saying, you all are connected to the judges, policymakers, and all the decision makers. If we wanted this world to be more equitable, we would see that, right? And we see that when white people have issues, right? Everything changes. COVID-19, the world, earth, and everything moved because white people were threatened. We need you all to use that same urgency when Black people, when Native people, when Black and brown bodies are threatened. So yes, I really need y'all to use y'all leverage. That's what I'm talking about with Mayan Burrell. Like a lot of us use our leverage and our resources and our platform, and we put our lives on the line. When I called out Amy Klobuchar, you think that was a career move? No, that was not a career. That was not a career move. A lot of the decisions and the stances that we push, it actually get us blackballed from a lot of these circles that y'all want to be in. I don't give a damn about the Black elite. I don't give a damn about no elite circles, and excuse my language, but I'm really serious when I say that I'm not here to please none of y'all. But if y'all are still in their good graces, y'all need to use y'all good graces and y'all good privilege to help our brothers and sisters. Just to give a couple of tangible examples, right? People need help writing their applications to get expungements. People need people to read over the legal cases and to be able to help to find where they may have been cheated, right? Like use your intellect, use your resources. Like, this is what I mean when I say don't complain, activate. It's not just a hashtag, it's a lifestyle. Like, you don't have to be me. You don't gotta impact policy and be on the ground as much as I am, but do something. Each and every one of us can do something. And there are so many brothers and sisters who need your help. I promise you, you can do something.
Just yes. Like, nothing else to add to that. Let me see where the other questions are. How do we convince folks that centering justice and transformation work and racial equity should be a primary when there is general skepticism of institutional racism and belief of punishable behavior as a tenet of Black culture?
Can you summarize that? That was a lot.
Yeah. So one is just like, how do we convince people basically who don't believe in transformative and racial equity and who believe that any shape or form of criminality is inherent in Black culture?
Brothers, David, you want to go?
I'm gonna let you address the second part. Let me say this about people who don't think, I don't think we should be absolved of our crime. I'm just saying we're going about taking accountability the wrong way. It's almost like people say, you're not going to get better from addiction unless you want to, right? Forced treatment doesn't work. I feel like victims need to have a whole lot more say. Like the state everything's not a crime against the state, right? You can't say somebody's a victim and they're not a victim. I don't know where when I got arrested, I had a kilo of cocaine. I don't know where that would have ended up. But I haven't heard about anybody who quit using when I got arrested, right? There's still amends I need to make with my community. I was always a community person, but I just gradually took on a lifestyle where I didn't really see it as wrong, to be honest with you. I know it's wrong, right? But I just gradually took on, it was just gradual. It was just different in that way. But victims need to be involved. And you can talk to plenty of victims who've testified against people who lost somebody and they gave their victim impact statement. And you talk to them 2 years later and ask them how they feel about it. So even that needs to be revisited, okay? If a victim comes in, a family member comes in and gives a statement about somebody who been murdered, y'all need to check back with them 2 years and they need to have another voice in renegotiating that sentence because they're carrying something in there that they can't carry. It's just unhealthy for society all the way around. And Leslie, I feel like you want to address the second half.
No, I mean, I really want to echo what you're saying because that is so important, right? Like, if somebody gets robbed of their car, locking them up is not helping that person that's carless. And the system really don't give a damn about the person that was robbed of the car or the person who stole the car. Let's be very clear. And they're all victims of poverty. Like, let's be very clear on the root issue and what the real enemy is. And your enemy is poverty, not people, right? Even y'all friend Aristotle said that poverty was the parent of crime and revolution. I'm just saying, even when we use your own people, okay, they saying the same things that we're saying. And so what I would really encourage people, because I believe life is about relationships, right? I believe that people, one of my professors said this, he said, people like to do business with people they know, they like, and they trust. And a lot of the time why they not listen to us is because they don't know, like, or trust us, right? And my thing is, you can't win them all. I'll try to win most of them, but you can't win them all. Win the people that you can, right? If you know people, it's going to sound a lot better coming from you and you articulating the points that we are making. Now give credit to where the source comes from sometimes, especially when it's public. But if you just in your day at the dining room table doing Christmas and doing Kwanzaa, bring up these topics and say, hey, what are we going to do to help our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated? There is time for a change. And honestly, you might find some unfamiliar allies, right? Like, there are people who actually will align with you that you never expected if you just give them the opportunity. And I think we got to break it down to the human perspective. Like, everyone is losing. We're losing potential. We're losing resources. We're losing a lot in the community by locking these people up away for life, right? Like, the studies show it. We're telling you it. It's time for a change for real, and we need to be a part of that. And I believe that if we had more people advocating, we would see a change. But people aren't really advocating for poor people, right? That's why the Poor People's Campaign even existed, is because these people are out of sight and out of mind. And so what I need you all to do is start sharing, right? So when I was in law school, just to give one more example, can you hear me good, Octavia, right now?
Yep, you got you.
When I was in law school, they had court watchers for women, and like women being treated, you know, discriminated against in domestic violence cases. And when I was in there, all I seen was Black men, you know, ding, 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 and Black women. And then you see a lot of people dealing with immigration issues. But my point is, why don't we have court watchers for that? Which, if y'all take my idea, at least call me, amen? Because we really do need court watchers. Y'all could take it, amen, feel free. I'm not one of the people. I don't really care. As long as it gets done in a good, ethical way and we get the outcome that we need, I don't really care about getting the credit for it. But I do want to know about it. I hope one of y'all will take that up, because I believe that we watched it and we helped and we really drew campaigns around, like, Black people are not getting real representation in America, right? And that is why they're able to attack us. And I know people were talking about this earlier, plea deals and all of that. Like, let's start really attacking some of that.
Yeah, I just want to add to this question of like people who are fighting or who aren't interested in racial equity or transformative justice. Racial equity isn't a Black issue. Racial equity isn't a Native issue. It isn't a Latinx, Latina, Latino issue. This is something, yeah, it's something that it's the issue that, like, if we tackle these things, everybody benefits. So when we like make it to seem like this only affects a certain population, you're really not acknowledging that everybody plays a part and everybody's harmed by it. Not to the same extent, but it's like you have a community of people, like white people, are acting in their, like, against their own self-interest, right? In many ways, to uphold a narrative that they don't actually benefit from. So when we're talking about racial equity and we're talking about transformational justice, this is it's not a like Black or white issue. This is like the issue. And I would say about the people's, you know, the Poor People's Campaign, that's why, you know, Martin Luther King got shot. Like, he didn't get shot for saying like we should all hold hands and love each other. He got shot because he was talking about we as a people need to rise up against capitalism. And then he was dead, right? So like the power and understanding the real, or holding true to the real systems, the real oppressive natures of things, and not dissecting it or, you know, bifurcating it as a Black issue, a Native issue, a housing issue, a poverty issue. Like, this is the thing, and it all operates within this, you know, nexus of capitalism. But we are basically out of time before we transfer over. I transferred back over to Susie. Just wanted to see if everyone on the panelists had any last words they wanted to offer to the attendees and to each other.
Nothing here.
Thank you, Marcus.
Yep.
I just want to thank Marcus and David for talking about your real life stories. I want to thank Octavia for moderating this amazing panel. Thank you all for bringing me here to be a part of this conversation. You know what I'm going to say, Octavia, don't complain, activate.
Activate.
Go shop, don't complain, activate. Amen. At leslieredmond.com. They make great Christmas gifts. Support Black women in real life. Don't just keep saying stand with Black women. Don't just be talking about, oh, Senator Harris, you know, first Black woman. No. Support Black women. I'm dead serious. Okay. Shop, don't complain, activate for your Christmas Kwanzaa gifts and for yourself. Grace and peace.
Put that in the chat, or can someone put that in the chat for people to have access to? David.
I want to say thank you to everybody. Octavia, this is my first introduction to you. I was looking familiar with Leslie's work just because I know a lot of people interacted with her. And thank you to Susie Keefe for reaching out and getting me connected. I appreciate it. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate the interest. But like Leslie says, act on, well, she says don't complain, activate. I'm asking you to act on that interest, right? So yeah, activate. Y'all can't even imagine how much it means to the people who are still in them dungeons, and what it means to their children who are not with them. So thank you to everybody.
Marcus, you didn't have any last words? I have something, but if you want to come back.
No, I'll go ahead. I'll wait till.
All you, go ahead.
All right. I just want to say thank you to everybody involved today. You know, I learned quite a bit about abolition and the cash bail system. Before being invited, I really wasn't, you know, I wasn't really thinking about this whole entire process, this issue, you know. But now that you made me well aware, wow, something serious right there. But I want to thank David especially, man. He's my brother. Love him to death, you know, and it's fun working with you, David. And I hope to continue to do some good in our communities wherever we're at, whether it's here in Fargo or there in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I look to see you out there, brother. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Likewise, love
Thank you guys. Just have two things to add. One, part of Minnesota Freedom Fund is that we do criminal and immigration. And it is crazy how the two systems are tied. You have people who are getting picked up from jails to go directly to ICE. And then you also have people in ICE who are fighting a criminal case without representation. So the connections of this work is important. If you feel like you need to have your bail paid or any other situation or know someone who needs their bail paid, hit up Minnesota Freedom Fund. The second thing that I want to uplift before passing it over to Susie is the importance of community engagement in this, right? Like we are all buying into I believe, David believes, Marcus even said, like, it takes a village to raise people. And what are our villages? Our neighborhoods, right? How many people do you know in your neighborhood? How many people, if you live in a building, how many people do you know in that building? Do you know the person who lives next to you? Do you know the person who lives to the left of you? If you don't, that's the work, right? That's how we change and we build transformation, is by going out and doing the hard work of talking to people. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Susie. I'm so grateful for all the panelists, and thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. This has been such an incredible 3 hours. I feel like we just blinked, and we got left with a lot of knowledge here in this time. And I'm grateful to you all. As I know, the entire Center for Justice and Law team, we've all been chatting behind the scenes and cheering you on, and we have been just so just touched by your stories and your willingness to share yourselves and your experiences. And I think this is such an incredible lesson in sharing and centering community experts, justice impacted folks in these conversations. And I think I can speak for all of the people who've attended today that we've learned so much from your willingness to share your knowledge with us. And I'm especially grateful to this panel, and the time that you shared with Miriam Kaba was, I think, a highlight for me. And I'm so grateful to you all for holding space with her. So thank you to everyone on the first panel as well, and to the Center for Justice and Law team that helped put together this incredible event. And thank you to everyone who has attended today. We're grateful for your support and presence, and we look forward to connecting with you all in the future. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend.